Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping the African continent. Ghana has reached a temporary agreement with Goldfields to continue mining while awaiting parliamentary approval. At the same time, Atlantic Lithium is pleading for a tax relief amid failing global prices. Meanwhile, the country's oil production continues to drop, with outputs declining for the fifth year in a row. What steps can Ghana take to better manage its natural resources and attract sustainable investment? In Nigeria, the ECWA Church is currently negotiating the release of 50 more captives and have expressed concerns over increasing violence targeting Christian communities. Having spent hundreds of millions in naira on ransom, how can religious communities and the government work together to address the rising insecurity and targeted violence? And finally, the Nigerian court has upheld the 3-year jail sentence of Professor Peter Ogban, the Ákwá Ibom returning officer, for rigging election results in favor of politician Godswill Akpabio during the 2019 elections by adding 5,000 fake votes to Mr Akpabio's count. What happened to the beneficiary of the fraud? Joining us today for insights is Ayotunde Abiodun. Welcome, Ayo, to the podcast.
Hello, it's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure to have you. Let's just get on with our first story for the day, which is a story from Ghana. So Ghana's oil output has declined, and this is the fifth consecutive year. What deeper structural or policy failures do you think might be contributing to this trend, and how might it impact their long-term energy security and fiscal planning?
All right, great question. So to kickstart, Ghana is grappling with a sharp decline in production, and this is largely due to the exodus of several international oil companies. What we see is that over the last 8 years, we've seen major players like ExxonMobil and Aker Energy exit the country, and this has contributed to the sector's current challenges. When we look at numbers, Ghana's crude oil production has been down by over 32% over the last 5 years, and annually there's been an annual fall of 7.4%. This is alarming, not just in terms of the lost revenue for the country, but it also reflects deeper structural and policy failures, such as delayed licensing rounds. There've been a number of regulatory uncertainty. There've been underinvestment in exploration. There've also been the over-reliance on legacy oil fields with little new development. All of these have signaled a lack these are weaknesses that have signaled a lack of long-term strategic plan.
So
So this trend poses significant risks to Ghana's energy security and fiscal planning, as oil revenues play a key role in budget forecasts and foreign exchange earnings. Without urgent reforms, such as expediting new discoveries, enhancing regulatory clarity, and incentivizing investment, Ghana may face a growing budget deficit, reduced global competitiveness, and vulnerability to the energy supply shocks.
thank you very much for your breakdown. But now, given Ghana's interim deal with, the gold fields and the request of Atlantic Lithium for a tax relief, how can the country now balance investor incentives with their national economic interest, especially at this time where the global commodity has this volatility, where you have all prices going up and down?
All right, great question. Just to provide context, Goldfield is a South African company, while Atlantic Lithium is an Australian company. And what this does show is it highlights a critical policy crossroad for Ghana, which is basically how to balance attracting and retaining investors in the extractive industries with safeguarding their national economic interests amid the global commodity volatility. So the key lies in crafting a responsive, transparent, and adaptive resource governance framework. So what there are a number of strategies here. First, Ghana must maintain policy credibility. So investors are seeking clarity, consistency, and respect for existing contracts. This sudden refusal by the country to automatically renew Godswill lease, though is sovereign in nature, this risks sending mixed signals if not framed within a clear legal and regulatory context. So Ghana must avoid short-term tactical moves that appear unpredictable, and instead they must align their transitions in lease arrangement with well-communicated policy goals like increased local vision, improved environmental standards, or equity participation. Secondly, there must be targeted incentive which should be time-bound and performance-based. So, for instance, in the Australian company, Atlantic Lithium's case, they'll be seeking a temporary relief. This can be granted in exchange for commitment to domestic processing, technology transfer, or guaranteed employment threshold. And this will help protect Ghana from any revenue loss while keeping strategically important projects alive during low price cycles. And lastly, I think Ghana should concentrate on local content and economic diversification policies. And this must be integrated into the extractive sector contract. So Ghana's long-term economic interests lies not just in taxing revenue, but also in using the resource investment to build industrial capacity, deepen infrastructure, and create resilient communities. So investor agreements should therefore include measurable development obligations beyond the mine gates.
Interesting recommendations. Hopefully, the Ghanaian government will, try to implement some of that by diversifying their economy as well, like you pointed out. So moving over to our second story, in Nigeria, we've seen the ECWA Church currently negotiating the release of 50 more captives. And this has, they have expressed their concerns on the increasing violence targeting the Christian communities. And they're spending a lot of money trying to regain the freedom of the people who are the hostages who are being held captive. So, what message does this send about the state's capacity or willingness to even protect its citizens, especially for vulnerable religious communities?
So I want to start off by saying this is a sad development, and the fact that the Evangelical Church Winning Hall has spent hundreds of millions of naira on ransom to secure the release of its members sends a deeply troubling message about the Nigerian state capacity and its political will to protect citizens, particularly those in vulnerable religious and ethnic communities. It also reflects a glaring abdication of the state's constitutional responsibility, with its primary responsibility, I must say, which is to guarantee security and uphold the sanctity of life, especially in groups especially for groups that are persistently targeted by violence, such as the Christian communities in Kaduna and Plateau states. And this reality not only underscores institutional fragility, but also reveals a trend where there's been a normalization of privatized security solutions. So this is a situation whereby families and religious bodies have been left to negotiate with armed actors due to the state's absence or ineffectiveness. And this signals a dangerous erosion of public trust, where communities feel that they are abandoned and they are compelled to engage in ransom negotiation themselves. This, in a way, is indirectly sustaining the kidnap economy. SBM has been making a number of noise now to show that the kidnapping trend in Nigeria is now an economy of its own. And lastly, I must say that this raises serious questions about state neutrality and bias. If you look at the recurring nature of these attacks against Christian populations, often attributed to Fulani militial groups, coupled with the inadequate prosecutions or preventing interventions by the Nigerian state, all these are fraying perceptions that the state is either complicit, indifferent, or overwhelmed. And this perception has the tendency to deepen religious and ethnic fault lines, and it threatens our national cohesion as a country.
I mean, interesting. There was something you said, and you said normalized. It has reached the point where we normalize that negotiation, with terrorists or kidnappers, right? And it's not meant to be so. So are religious communities becoming de facto negotiators with armed groups due to like the state's inaction? And what long-term impact might this have on Nigerians' rule of law and governance as well? Because this now is taking it back to where we're seeing people taking self-help into their hand. And normally when you find a situation where people accost the kidnappers, we tend to see more of jungle justice as opposed to trusting the system and trusting the justice system, to take justice and let justice to be seen to be done as well. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with you. To the first arm of your question, which is, are we seeing a trend where religious communities are becoming de facto negotiators with armed groups? The answer is yes, absolutely. And this trend is not just an humanitarian concern. It represents a systemic threat to the rule of law, the legitimacy of the Nigerian state, and the future of governance in Nigeria. And when we have a situation whereby faith-based institutions are forced to step into the vacuum left by the Nigerian state inaction, which is basically them going to raise force themselves, engage kidnappers, and secure their own protection. This signals a quiet devolution of state authority to non-state actors. And off my head, I say this has at least four far-reaching consequences. So first, we see that there's going to be an erosion of state monopoly on force and justice. This is already happening. The Nigerian state's inability to protect its citizens or to enforce the law has enabled armed groups to operate with impunity. In the Nigerian context today, and there's a concept known as government spaces. These are spaces where the Nigerian state no longer has control over, and this is a sad reality. The second consequence is that we've seen an entrenchment of the ransom economy. So we see religious groups, families paying hundreds of millions in ransom. And as such, we're seeing banditry becoming a profitable and self-sustainable activity on its own. Just to give more context, SBM as an institution runs a report, where a kidnapping report where we try to quote how much has been paid into ransom within a specific period. And I think it was just last year we saw the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics also bring out a report where they quoted numbers of hundreds of millions that have been paid as ransom. So this is a sad reality, and it's a far-reaching consequence of the reality as a country right now. The third far-reaching consequence is that it undermines national cohesion. So when we see certain regions or certain religious communities left to fend and to protect for themselves, there's a perception of state bias, neglect, or evil complicity, and this has a tendency to grow. And as such, this deepens Nigeria's ethno-religious divides, and it fosters a localized resentment and mistrust against the Nigerian state. And the last consequence I must say is that we are seeing a weakening of institutional legitimacy. Day by day, the Nigerian state seems to be losing legitimacy. So the more we see citizens turn to churches, mosques, or ethnic vigilante groups for protection, the less legitimacy and relevance the Nigerian state retains in the eyes of its people. And over time, this risks reducing the Nigerian state to a symbolic actor in areas where it no longer governs in any practical sense. So it's a really sad reality we find ourselves currently as a Nigerian state.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is a sad reality, and like you mentioned, it has not become like a ransom economy of its own that has breeded a lot of loss, not only of lives, but of, people's property, because people sometimes sell their properties to be able to pay ransom. And the fact that, they are going unchecked, there's not really like the government strong arming, perpetrators of this crime. We're seeing it bloom. And sadly, the Nigerian government has to take action on this. I mean, really lovely points raised there, Ayo. Let's go over to our last story. So this week, we also saw the Nigerian court upheld a 3-year jail sentence for Professor Peter, the Ákwá Ibom State returning officer, for rigging election in favor of Godswill Akpabio. What are your thoughts on this sentence, right? Does it show some judicial accountability? For many years running, there's been this broken trust between the Nigerian people and the judiciary. So especially during the election, so does this, sentencing show some form of judicial accountability? Um, but if not, what does it say about the culture of impunity when politicians who benefited from this rigging face no known consequences? So, if on one hand we're seeing the prosecution of the returning officer, why are we not also seeing the sentencing or punishment of the benefactor of the effect of that returning officer?
Yeah, great question and great point you already raised. So first, the sentencing of Professor Ogban indeed reflects a degree of judicial accountability, particularly in holding individuals accountable for election-related crimes. However, this starkly exposes the entrenched culture of selective justice and political impunity in Nigeria. So the fact that Godswill Akpabio, who is the direct beneficiary of this rigging, is not only free, but now he holds the powerful position of Senate President. This sends a troubling message that while lower level actors or intermediaries may be punished, the political elites remain shielded from meaningful consequences. And this undermines public confidence in the integrity of Nigeria's electoral and judicial system. It basically gives the suggestion that accountability is ironically applied. Those with proximity with power or with political capital can evade scrutiny, while scapegoats bear the brunt of prosecution. So, when we see a case whereby the academic who manipulated the numbers is in prison, but the politician whose mandate was tainted by those false figures is rewarded in television, it poses the law of question as to is there really justice in the Nigerian state? And these patterns have the capacity to fuel a widespread cynicism. They can weaken deterrence against electoral malpractice, and they also has a tendency to embolden future political actors to engage in similar misconduct with the expectation that they can be selected for prosecution, while those at the lower rung of the whole misconduct will be held accountable. So it's just a sad perception that the rule of law in Nigeria bends to political expediency and not to principle. So it's a situation whereby the rule of law is not one of the basic harm of the rule of law is equality before the law. But what we're seeing now is there's no equality before the law. Some are above the law.
Interesting. I mean, going forward, what steps do you think that, the Nigeria can take to build a stronger, um, basically like a deterrent against electoral fraud, especially as we have the 2027 general elections looming. So we have seen INEC now trying to seek a new powers to appoint state directors for elections. So trying to take away the power of the president to elect, commissioners. Do you think that those kind of steps are one of the steps that, would eradicate, political influence, within the electoral system in Nigeria?
Yeah, absolutely. To start off with your point on INEC's independence and protection, so I'm of the opinion that we need to insulate INEC from executive influence. So one of my recommendations would be that INEC's funding should be put on first line charge, and that leadership appointments should be subjected to multi-party legislative scrutiny rather than a unilateral presidential nomination. This will help to strengthen public trust and operational autonomy of the INEC as an institution that runs election year in, year out. I also have a number of recommendations I can put forward. So we must see we must see criminal liability for political beneficiaries of fraud. The Nigerian state is indeed serious. We should see actors like Akpabio also bear consequences for bad action. So Nigeria must close the accountability gap by ensuring that not only electoral officers and facilitators, but also the politicians who benefit from the rigged outcomes face some form of legal consequences. And this will signal that manipulating elections is not just a technical crime, it's a political and criminal offense with career-ending implication. Another recommendation is that with urgency, we must operationalize the Electoral Offences Commission. I understand that there's been a bill before the House of Reps for a while now to create an Electoral Offences Commission. But what we've seen is that we've not seen the political will for that to pass into a law. So we need an Electoral Offences Commission, which is basically an independent body that will be dedicated to investigating and prosecuting electoral crimes, separate from INEC and the police. And this will help to break the cycle of impunity and politicization that's hampered the enforcement of electoral offences in Nigeria today. In this conversation, we cannot do without touching on the need for more judicial reform and speedy adjudication. So we see that we must see situation whereby electoral petition tribunals are courts are reformed to resolve disputes swiftly and impartially. We must also embed the use of more technology with transparency. We recognize that there's been the adoption of technology like beavers and IRF, but we've not seen the political will to really utilize this technology. Depend on a full transparency system, public education, and rigorous testing. And was also ensure that when we adopt technology for our elections, there must be back-end systems that must be made auditable and accessible to every Nigerian to be able to follow up his usage. So ahead of 2027, we must prevent a situation whereby what we saw play out in 2023 elections. The utilization of technology must be done with transparency and the political way to put them to full use. And I think my final recommendation would be that we need more civic education and voter mobilization. So all of this, the stories we touched on today, so starting from the security incidents with ECWA, then boiling down to this selective justice application as regards the academic and leaving the political actor out. These are development that have the instances of making Nigerians no longer interested in the whole election cycle. So Nigerians would just rather give out of just step out of the process and decide not to vote any longer because of the expectation that there's really nothing that's going to come out of it. There's nothing. So basically, the patterns are not going to change. So there's a need for we to keep up with civic education and continue to mobilize voters and to let them know that they have the power to report infractions and to demand accountability from the Nigerian state. And the civil society must play a leading role in shaping public norms around electoral integrity. So those are my recommendations.
Thank you. I really loved your recommendations, Ayo. But I mean, if I play devil's advocate a bit, so on one hand, we are saying, government should reduce government spending. And on one hand, you are saying that we should have a commission for following offenses. Don't you think that someone will say, we're having too many agencies, we're having two law enforcement agencies operational. Why should we have an electoral offenses commission?
So my reason is that going through the normal court procedures has not really yielded any result, and that's because normally the courts are already overburdened with other nature of claims and offenses to try. So there's a need for us to show expediency in trying out electoral offenses, and seeing as they're kind of special in themselves. Elections happen every 4 years, so there's a need for you to make your case within that particular electoral cycle. So in my view, I think we need to have an electoral offences commission, which is strictly focused on trying electoral offences. That can help us break the cycle of impunity and politicization that's hampered our everyday courts from enforcing electoral offences.
Thank you. I do agree with you, Ayo. That's all for today. Thank you very much. I did enjoy the conversation, and thank you very much for your detailed recommendations on across the stories that we had today. To all our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, like, share, and we'd love to hear from you. Please drop your comments in the comment section. For deeper insights into our work, visit our website as sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn at SBM Intelligence. Thank you for tuning in to the week ahead. Join us next Friday for more updates shaping the African continent.